here we go.
Welcome to the 9-Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome back to the 9-Route Fantasy Football Podcast. We are heading into Week 15. This is pretty much the final bell for the fantasy football playoffs. Pat, how'd you do this week as far as hanging on? I know we were both on life support.
Yeah, well, it looks like somebody pulled the plug on both of us. It looks like you're going to win. You're going to win our matchup pretty handily. Although I did make it respectable. I still have one guy left to go.
That's a first. That's a first.
I still have Sony Michel left tonight, but unless he scores me about 37 I need. Yeah, I have a feeling that that's going to be a done deal. But unfortunately for both of us, the two teams that we needed to lose ahead of us look like they're both probably going to win. So either way, this pretty much was just a matchup of pride between the two of us, and it looks like I don't have any pride left. So, which I'm used to. So that really doesn't.
Yeah, it's the first step is admitting it, and then from there you can kind of build on your character. Yeah, I mean I'm highly disappointed. I thought I had a shot, and seeing Thursday night where started Dalvin Cook. I know I texted you and said, hey, look, I traded for him. He's going to be my guy, live or die. And he I can't even say thank you enough to Dalvin Cook for everything he did for me. I'd like to thank God. And no, but I also have Roethlisberger, who had been, I had been high on him, and to see him start the game so poorly, figuring out, well, at least one out of these guys is going to do it. And then he started really coming back in the second half. I mean, it was a crazy game. To see everything happen. But yeah, no, it was a good weekend for both of us. And like you said, yeah, we had a good matchup. And unfortunately, I will be going into next season with I don't have to show up to the draft too early, since I won't have a pick until the 9th round in our league of record by making my all-in move for Dalvin Cook. So he actually paid off, but at a cost. So, but how it is, you look back and you had some matchups where you put up 150 points and you still get crushed by 30 or 40. And you look at point differentials at the end. So, you shoulda, woulda, coulda. You see other people that every week were just eking it out, or, winning those slugfest of 89 to 78. And it's like, really, come on, man. Like somebody's going to win a division that way. And then, make it into the playoffs. So, but it is what it is.
That's meanwhile, you put up 135 and lose. But
yeah,
I actually play in another league with, a lot of people that friends of ours, some other guys from the military that I'm friends with, but they actually have a pretty cool system. It's not really a system. It's more of a record scoring type system where you get awarded like victory points based on whether or not you win, and then also based off of where you finish as far as total points for the week. So even if let's say again, are like the second highest scoring team, but you just happen to face the highest scoring team of that week, you still get some victory points for that week because you finished in the top half of the standings for that week. So it's not a total loss. At least you're getting something out of it. And I really like, that it helps to keep the good teams in it, even when they run into some bad luck. And it helps to keep the teams that are winning those, like you said, those 89 to 75 type games, they still get victory points, obviously, for the win, but they don't get as many because they're not finishing in the top half. So it really rewards the better teams and sort of balances out I really think that the best 6 teams in that league make the playoffs pretty much every year, because those victory points don't really lie the way the record can sometimes. So
yeah, I like the idea. Maybe we can bring it up for our draft where, like you said, it's got to be, and I've been on both ends where, yeah, you luck out and things like that, but to know it, and you can look back and see where, yeah, some teams are getting, they put up 1,600 points, but they're getting outscored by another 200. And it's like, well, obviously, yeah, it's like one of the highest scoring teams, and that's what it's all about, is the points and all that. Yeah. We have our tiebreakers set up the way they are. And that's honestly what even kept you and I in it, was the ability to get there based on a point basis, maybe versus head to head. I actually didn't even go back and look, but yeah, I'm still hanging in my work league, so I'm hoping to get right tonight on that level. I'm down, but I got Stafford going with my kicker. The other guy's got. I am going against who? Oh, he's got James Conner. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to make it out of that league. I took a bad loss last week, so we'll see what happens. And then the sleeper league, I just tried to help you get through this season. Maybe as the W, got you a couple quarterbacks, and in exchange for draft picks. So I'm kicking my can down the road in multiple leagues.
Yeah, that was me pulling a Rudy there for that one. I'm mortgaging the future because I got a good team, and it almost I don't want to say came back to bite me. It actually helped this week. I was down pretty big to a team with only 3 wins, and thanks to Aaron Rodgers' 53-point outburst versus the Bears, I am currently up to. We both still have a couple players to go tonight, but I think it stands to reason that I should hold on for a win here, which would be huge, because losing to a team that's really out of it is tough in this league, because it's not a head to head or whatever. It's basically just best overall record, most points scored, and I'm up there in the points. I think I want to say I'm either first or second in total points so far this year. So second.
Yeah, you're pretty far up. At one point you were top in the league, and then a couple of them guys were like 10 wins in a row almost. It was like, Jesus, man. But it's a different, it's getting used to that as like a different animal altogether, trying to figure out on a weekly basis. Yeah, where you're not really doing much adjusting. It's maybe pulling a one-hit wonder off the waiver wire. So that's an interesting one. I like the super flex thing. Maybe we can try to get that. I always wanted 2 quarterbacks in our league. I always felt like we rely so much on running back, wide receiver, tight end that, you see a lot of the quarterbacks that are, we only need 12 because we have 12 teams, but you see a lot of them guys on the outside that could get more involved outside of a bye week. So every time I bring it up, it's like, no, but I don't want a kicker in our league. It's like, okay, so you don't want more points. You want just not a kicker. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Yeah. But and shout out to Bird, number 1 team. Unfortunately, I'm still disappointed. I'm doing the prognosticating with you, Pat, and still am kind of mesmerized that you would keep a cold wide receiver in your starting lineup and keep one of the hottest running backs in football on your bench. Granted, a little bitter, might have helped me at least have some hope for tonight, but big shout out to the number 1 team in our league. And I wish you nothing but the worst in the playoffs. All right.
I have to root for Jay. Not that I wouldn't anyway, but he is my partner in that other league I was telling you about, which is, sort of our most lucrative league, which it looks like as of right now, looks like we are going to go into the playoffs as the number 1 seed with a bye. So, hopefully, if he gets lucky, hopefully it's in that league and not our league of record, but we will see how that goes.
So going into this week, you did a little digging and you didn't have to dig too deep or too far for any running backs on the waiver wire this week, huh?
Yeah, no, didn't even need a shovel. I could dig them up with a spoon. Yeah, so let's jump into enough of our. Nobody cares about how our fantasy teams did. We'll talk about.
We suck, but we're going to tell you who to pick, guys. Don't worry, we got you.
Neither of us made the playoffs, but that's the way it goes in fantasy. You've been bitten by the injury bug pretty bad this year, and still, to come down to week 14 was still a chance to make the playoffs. I gotta say you did a pretty good job. I'm always impressed by your ability to truly go for broke, and this year you kind of got the go, and next year you'll be broke. But
if you ain't first, you're last, and that's what I'm gonna be last next year.
So let's jump into our waiver wire pickups for this week. At the running back position, looks like there's only, at least from what I could find, there's only really 2 guys that I think would be worth adding. Obviously there's probably a bunch of guys that are worth adding, but as far as waiver wire pickups that you could possibly pick up and plug into your lineup immediately if necessary, the first one is Rashad Penny from the Seattle Seahawks. I know it feels like we do a lot of point chasing when it comes to waiver wire pickups, and Penny obviously had a huge week. He went 16 carries for 137 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then added a reception for 1 yard. But I think he ended up being the the running back 1 on the week, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, sorry, number 2 behind Dalvin Cook. But Seattle's been looking for a running back. Obviously they signed Adrian Peterson. Since Chris Carson went down, they've kind of, just been bouncing back and forth between, who they had on their roster, guys that they're signing off of the street. And, it's just a matter of trying to find a guy that they feel they can hand the ball off to 15 plus times a game. And I feel like Pete Carroll has always really liked Rashad Penny. He has always, Pete Carroll talks well of all of his players, but he really seems to come out for Rashad Penny and really show how much he likes this guy. And the fact that he's finally healthy, and that Chris Carson is not there and Penny is, kind of the next man up, so to speak. He proved Pete Carroll right. He proved that, he's got the juice to produce when given the opportunity. And I think moving forward, he's going to continue to get that opportunity until he fails with it. And so I think he's probably a guy that you could pick up this week. I know that I'm going to try to add him in pretty much all my leagues if available, not just because I want another running back, but because going into the playoffs, you want to keep those players who have the potential of scoring a lot of points out of the reach of other owners in your league. So even if you're not looking for a running back, you're not hurting at the running back position, you have a pretty solid lineup set already. It doesn't hurt to grab, one of these hot waiver wire guys. Now, Rashad Penny may come out next week and have 6 carries for 12 yards and, you may end up dropping him. But if he ends up being the bell cow back for Seattle and continues to, churn out these productive fantasy weeks, you don't want him on another roster. You also want to make sure that you have a bunch of guys that you can plug in case of an injury, or like we've seen numerous times throughout this and last fantasy season, these guys pop up on the COVID list all of a sudden out of nowhere on Friday or Saturday. And now you don't have a replacement because you didn't plan ahead. So anytime you can get your hands on any of these running backs or wide receivers who look like they could be in a role, an increased role, or could be taking on a little bit more of their team's offense, you want to go out and grab those guys right away and make sure that you have them rostered so that you can either use them in a pinch or so that they can't basically be used against you come down the stretch in the playoffs.
No, I agree. Again, just real quick, I know it's tough, but yeah, to see a guy like that flash that potential in an offense that's struggling to find a running back of any sort to stay healthy and things like that. Yeah, I think he's worthy of a roster spot right now. Seattle's trying to make a backdoor playoff push, so they're not going to slow down.
Yeah, another guy who, maybe not on the same level as Penny. He's definitely not going to be a guy who gets all of the work for his team, but surprisingly, he's still getting quite a bit of it, is Devontae Booker for the New York Giants. He's available in like 75% of leagues. He didn't have the greatest game in the world this week. He had 8 rushes for 56 yards, had 4 catches on 5 targets for 28 yards. The Giants, they haven't bailed on him. Saquon Barkley went down for that stretch, 4 or 5 weeks, whatever it was. And, Booker did a really good job in Barkley's place. And I think that, the Giants sort of saw that and realized that this guy is talented. Plus, I mean, if you've been watching the games, you can see that Barkley is just not the same guy that he was 2 years ago. Maybe with more opportunities, he starts to pick things up and, look like the old explosive Saquon Barkley that we're used to seeing, but it just hasn't happened this year. Right now, the last 3 games, Barkley has been back. The Giants have basically given Devontae Booker roughly 45% of the snaps and opportunities out of the backfield that carries and targets. And Barkley's getting about 55%. So now Barkley has been a little bit more productive with his touches over those last few games, but Booker's still respectable. In a PPR league, you're looking at 12 plus points from what he put up this past week. He put up a pretty respectable total, and he's still getting touches in that offense. I know it's not a great offense, but again, if you're looking for a guy just to get in there and get you some touches, a guy like Booker, who has proven that he can do it and is still obviously a part of what the Giants want to do on offense, I feel like he's a decent pickup. He's probably not going to be a guy you're excited to get out and grab and try to start, but he is somebody who in a pinch can at least get you some carries and some targets out of the backfield.
Yeah, no, Saquon does not look healthy. A lot going on, trying to come back, another injury, trying to come back. And Booker has been pretty consistent for him most of the season. Again, that offense is a bit of a mess, but probably the safest floor out of anybody right now, like I said, is Booker, where, he might get you a 9 to 12 as a flex or something like that. So he's almost more start worthy than Saquon, because you can kind of depend on what he's giving you.
At least recently, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I did have one running back just to add real quick as a little bit of a homer, so to speak. I know his performance before the bye was a little based on a backup quarterback coming in, which some things are still a little cloudy, so it remains to be seen. But Kenny Gainwell from the Eagles, he had a great game right before the bye with Gardner Minshew and a quarterback. Just took a quick peek, and it looks like as far as the team goes, which has an offense that can move the football a little bit. A lot of injuries around the running back spot. Gainwell's been pretty much healthy all season. Last 4 weeks, he leads all Eagles running backs in targets and red zone targets. In that time, he's got 90% receiving percentage. So, again, it looks like maybe they're trying to get him more involved. At the beginning of the year, he looked like he was going to get used, and then suddenly kind of disappeared. And again, that was with Jalen Hurts under center. So it's going to be, maybe a different concept going forward. Obviously, Hurts right now was a high ankle sprain, 2 to 4 weeks, was able to get a bye week, so he should come back. But to see the production that's able to come out of him, and with Sanders being a little unreliable with injury, Jordan Howard's still not quite 100%, you might see him as a possible, matchup based, I guess, to say flex position. Definitely not worthy of like RB2 category or anything. He has some of those games, but he definitely does put up some points, I think, and could be worthy of just a bench spot, and then eventually maybe even make it into your starting lineup.
What I would, I guess, like to put out there as far as running backs and, waiver wire pickups and things like that, I do not necessarily believe in handcuffing all of your running backs. I think there are certain guys who, like in the case of Dalvin Cook, who has a clear backup who is going to take, pretty much the 90 to 100% of the work that the starter gets upon injury, like Alexander Madison would. I think in those cases, I think it's fine to handcuff your running backs. But I think during the year, there's so much injuries and kind of ebbs and flows with playing time and committee backfields where, certain guys become a little bit more valuable. I think you need those roster spots for guys that you're kind of riding the stock ticker with, you know what I mean? Guys are going up and going down, and you want to kind of add and drop based off of the trajectory of, each of these players' games. I think you need those roster spots. But during the playoffs, there's no more bye weeks. So you're going into the playoffs with this sort of idea that this is my lineup going forward. You're pretty much going to start the same players basically every week, barring, maybe you have a wide receiver or a running back with a really good or a really bad matchup, and you have somebody on the bench that has a really good or a really bad matchup. So you may switch out, your flex spot or your wide receiver 2, running back 2 spot, whatever. But for the most part, you have a pretty good idea of what your roster looks like. And there's probably certain guys who have gotten you this far, and those are the guys you're going to stick with. I do believe now is the time to go out and pick up pretty much any handcuff that is going to get 60+% of the work, if and when the starter goes down, if there's some kind of injury. Guys like, we talked about Devontae Booker. He instantly becomes a startable asset if something happens to Saquon Barkley. Guys like Khalil Herbert, who proved that when David Montgomery went out, he could handle the load. He could produce for your fantasy team. A lot of people have since dropped him for good reason. He doesn't touch the ball hardly at all anymore. So there's no point in keeping him on your roster. But if you're a David Montgomery owner, you need to go out and grab Khalil Herbert and put him on your bench just in case something happens, because you don't want to get stuck trying to make a playoff run. And then all of a sudden, one of your big name running backs goes out and you have nobody to replace them. So I think this is just my personal, the way that I play fantasy football. It has done me well in the past. I've avoided some major catastrophe just by having the right guy on my bench. So guys like Latavius Murray, who, Murray's still getting a few carries here and there, but if Devontae Freeman goes down, Murray is literally the number one and probably, by a wide margin on his team. Guys like Ronald Jones, who, don't really have a lot of value right now, but if Leonard Fournette goes down, obviously Jones becomes a starting running back on, the top offense in the entire league. So go out and grab these guys now. Not only do I like to grab my handcuffs, but I also like to look at my matchups and start picking up handcuffs for the teams that I'm going to be playing against the next week. So if I look and I see, a guy, I'm going against a guy with Leonard Fournette, I may go ahead and pick up Ronald Jones, especially if you can do it a week ahead of time. If you have some sort of set bracket where like, okay, these are the teams I'm going to be playing, or one of the two teams I'm going to be playing, you can really get a huge advantage if, somebody gets injured, even if it's just for a week, they get injured and now they don't have the opportunity or the ability to go pick up the handcuff or the backup running back on that specific team, because now you have them. So I do like to, keep the actual waiver running backs to a minimum in the playoffs. If you made the playoffs, you should kind of have at least a halfway decent lineup already. So I don't really think you need, to add a ton of, potential starters per se off of the waiver wire. I think, add in some guys for protection definitely is a big help.
100%. And to add to that, let alone on the injury front, I briefly touched on it earlier, talking about a previous year in the league where some of these top teams, not a lot of them, there is more parity this year than ever, but you're looking at Green Bay, Tampa Bay, Arizona that look to be Arizona slightly, the Dallas Cowboys, even New England's kind of starting to pull away a tiny bit. If the team gets to a point where they can rest starters and you don't have the backup, you're screwed unless you have somebody else on your team that can jump right in on a matchup base like that. So suddenly you could get to week 16 and maybe let's just say, like you just talked about, like Leonard Fournette, they're going to rest him a little bit. So suddenly, Ronald Jones, Giovanni Bernard become a little more integral for a week or two just to kind of get the offense by. That's something you have to be ready for, where again, versus Green Bay, they have, Aaron Jones, Dillon, they're using them a little intertwined. You could see a little bit of craziness on that. And Dallas, obviously the NFC East is pretty much looking like theirs unless they really fall apart at the end. And they're going to make the playoffs. They could look to push maybe to get a tiebreaker, but at the end of the day, they're going to make sure that they go in there as 100% as humanly possible. These are some of the other reasons that you do want to have those handcuffs, where you get to the fantasy playoffs and you might actually need Benjamin to be a starter or a flex on your team because of the way the matchups just fell out and you don't have any other options. So, a Larry Roundtree for Eckler, who suddenly, they made the playoffs. Now, right now, they're a game behind the Chiefs, but you have to pay attention to the real football stats on that level. Titans are a couple games ahead of the Colts. Colts are going to make a push, but Titans could start to rest people if they clinch the division in that last week or two. You don't want to go into your final or the second leg of your final, even if you're up big, and turn around and just have mishmash to throw out there and fingers crossed and hiding under the covers. So like you said, Pat, you want to have the backups for injuries, and you do want to have them ready to go in case anybody on your starting lineup that's gotten you so far, they got you 15 weeks, 16 weeks, and suddenly Andy Reid decides to sit Pat Mahomes. That's one thing you could find a streamer, a quarterback. But if you were living off of Kelsey and Tyreek Hill and they only play a half, you better be ready to go because they're not going to get as much usage as they did. So those days of combining for 30 points just drop down to 10. You need to make up the difference quick. You better have somebody ready to go.
Yeah, especially in leagues that play all the way to the end to week 18, like we do in our league of record. I know there's a lot of, obviously I watch and listen to a lot of other fantasy content out there. There's a lot of people in the fantasy community that really sort of scoff at week 18 championship play. But I would say this, last year we saw a lot fewer teams resting starters because number one, there's more teams that are vying for just, the final wild card spot with 7 teams now making the playoffs. And with there only being one bye, unless you're, a game or two ahead going into week 18 where, you're a game ahead and you have the tiebreaker, or you're 2 games ahead, that whole resting guys may not be as commonplace moving forward. And I hope it's not, for fantasy football's sake, because I would like to get to the point where every league plays all the way to week 18, because extending the fantasy season another week is just a week more fun that we get to have playing fantasy football. So I would like to see all leagues eventually get to the point where they don't feel scared or worried to play in week 18. But you're right that there is still those instances where certain guys get rested at the end of the year because, they're more important to a playoff run than they are to winning a meaningless week 18 game. All right. So you want to move on to the wide receivers? I feel like we covered running backs the best we could.
Yeah. I know you had a couple names there in the wideouts, and then we'll start to look at QBs and tight ends and defense.
Yeah. So just a couple of guys that, again, we try to keep these waiver wire pickups to players that are available in 50% of leagues or better. And I do my best to sort of go through the 3 top sites, NFL, ESPN, and yahoo.com, and just kind of average out the roster percentages. So, your league specifically, some of these guys may not be available, but they're available in enough leagues to where we feel like we can bring them up, and it's going to relate to at least a decent amount of the people listening to the podcast. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Devontae Parker. I know the Dolphins just came off a bye or coming off a bye this week, but Parker's available in about 62% of leagues. And when he's healthy, Tua looks for Parker. I know that, Jalen Waddle is getting all the hype this year, and deservedly so. He's definitely been, besides Jamar Chase, I feel like he's been the best rookie wide receiver out of this draft class as far as production goes this year. So when Parker is healthy and in the lineup, he's averaging 8 targets a game, which is 22.6% of the team's targets. Jalen Waddle, in the games that he's played, has averaged 22.7% of targets. So only 0.1% higher of the targets in the games that he's played compared. Now, I'm not saying like in those games where Parker and Waddle have played together, those games have been some where Parker's been targeted more, Waddle's been targeted more. But I'm just saying in their games, you can't necessarily compare for the season because Parker obviously hasn't played as many games. He's been injured. But when he's out there, he's getting Jalen Waddle type targets, and he's producing with them. He's missed over half of Miami's games, and he's still 4th on the team in targets and receptions. And Miami has 3 pretty good matchups in the fantasy playoffs. They play the Jets, who are actually fairly decent against the wide receiver, but they give up the most points in the league. And that just so happens to come to running backs most of the time. And that's generally because teams just run the ball against the Jets, but it's not like you can't pass against them. They just happen to not give up a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers because all the running backs are hogging them before, the receivers get a chance to. So they're not necessarily a terrible matchup. It's the Saints, who are the 3rd worst team to wide receivers, and the Tennessee Titans, who are the 2nd worst team to wide receivers so far on the year. So, if Devontae Parker can stay healthy for, at least the next few weeks, he's got a shot to crack your roster and actually help you win a fantasy championship. So I think if Devontae Parker is out there, he is absolutely a must add. Even if you have, like I said, even if you have your wide receiver core sort of set, Parker is a guy who basically can push his way in there with his production. He's been that good this year when he's played. The second guy on the list is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Rudy, you just happened to pick him up this week and played him against me and helped you secure the victory this week. He's available in roughly 89% of leagues still. He went 8 for 73 this past week. which is respectable, especially in a PPR league. But the last 2 weeks, he's tied for fourth in total targets in the league. Now, we still have a Monday night game, obviously, tonight to play, where Cooper Kupp is probably going to jump into there. So he would drop down to fifth. But he's had 24 targets in the last 2 weeks. He's turned those 22 targets into 18 receptions for 159 yards and a touchdown. He leads Detroit's wide receiver core in total targets for the year and is only 8 behind TJ Hawkinson. Now, Hawkinson has been basically their main target the entire year, and St. Brown, being a rookie, didn't get as much playing time or as many targets earlier in the year, but is getting targeted so much more frequently recently that he's almost caught up to Hawkinson for the team lead in targets. And I just feel like watching those games, Detroit have to come back and, throwing the ball 35 plus times a game, it just seems like Goff and St. Brown have a connection now. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where rapport develops over the season, and I think it's developed between those two guys. And I think that, again, he's maybe not a guy you're going to rush out to grab and start right away, but I think he's obviously a viable option in your flex position if somebody goes down, or if you just maybe don't have a great option for your flex spot now.
Yeah, just to piggyback that. Yeah, no, I did. I had Elijah Moore on my team, and obviously he went on the injury list. So yeah, I'm scrambling to pick up somebody, and I know he had been a hot name. And yeah, looking back, even the beginning of the season, he had started to get worked in pretty quick. Took him a little bit to get acclimated to that offense, and lo and behold, yeah, you're starting to see that come to fruition. You had DeAndre Swift and Hawkinson was out, so that kind of helps to keep him as busy as possible. But yeah, you are really starting to see where Goff looks to him, not comparing them totally based on skill, but as a target monster. You saw what Goff did when he had Cooper Kupp for a couple seasons. So he kind of has that look to him of that guy that's going to make some plays, be there, catch the ball, possibly even get a score for you. And yeah, he had a couple double-digit games prior in the season, and then obviously that offense kind of plateaued. Again, it's not a world beater by any stretch, but if they're just going to be there to, like you said, stay in games and try to keep going and score points, and they want to win more than one game this season, so they're not going to just leave the gym on a miss by any stretch. They have Arizona, Atlanta, Seattle, and Green Bay. Again, Green Bay week 18. That's one of those personally that it could be a Green Bay kind of shutting things down because they're already in a good spot. And, they try to keep Detroit respectable, but they're not worried about holding them back or maybe fighting for a playoff spot. Tiebreaker, maybe. Seattle secondary has been so-so. Atlanta, they give up points left and right. Arizona, that'd probably be a little bit of a tough matchup for him next week. But yeah, he's a guy who could help you finish your season strong as a flex, and possibly, depending on how your team goes with injuries and the like, it could be a borderline a wide receiver too for you if he keeps up the volume that he's doing in 15 plus a game.
Another guy who, again, he's not a guy that you're going to plug in every single week. We're not saying that these, waiver wire pickups are guys that you have to go out and get and start. We understand that, again, like I said earlier, you probably have your roster fairly set going into the playoffs, but you do want to continue to add depth pieces. You do want to continue to add, pieces to keep away from your opponents. And another guy that sort of falls into that category for me is Kendrick Bourne with the New England Patriots. He's available in roughly 66% of leagues. He was also on bye this week, so I don't have any stats for his most recent or for his week 14 game, but Bourne has really kind of become Mac Jones's most reliable target. He's not getting a ton of volume because they just don't throw a lot. The Buffalo game aside, in that, crazy hurricane or whatever the hell they were playing in. It's funny. I was looking at the stats today and I'm like, wait, why does every other team have targets listed in week 13, but the Patriots don't? And then I scrolled down and I realized, oh, that's right. They only had 3 total in that game. So, but even without that game, that game aside, over the past 4 weeks, the 3 main receivers for the Patriots, we're talking Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers, and Nelson Aguilar. Bourne has 29 targets to Myers 34. Aguilar comes in a third with 24. But Bourne actually has the most receptions. 24 of those 29 targets were caught. And he's got the most touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. He's got 3 receiving touchdowns, 2 Aguilar's 2 and Jacoby Myers 1. So while all 3 guys are sort of, getting somewhere in that, 7 to 8 targets per game range on average, I personally feel like Kendrick Bourne has shown more recently. If you look at his target totals, they are sort of trending up while the other 2 wide receivers are trending down or staying the same. And I feel like it's because Mac Jones knows that if he goes to Kendrick Bourne, Bourne's going to do something with it. Not only is he really good with, yards after the catch, but he's also seems to have the surest hands on the team. And now I don't know if that's because he plays in the slot. I know it's a lot harder to cover guys that are in the slot because of, how much field you have to cover as a defender. But, Bourne, whatever he's doing it well. And I think that Mac Jones is going to continue to look to him to keep this offense moving, when they do have to throw the ball.
Yeah, no, it is. Mac Jones has been efficient. And again, Belichick, he's putting him in a spot where he's trying to just help him along to learn the offense. He's been coming along pretty strong. And then, obviously you see the blip that was the Buffalo game. But coming out of a bye, that he's definitely getting everybody on the same page. Like at the beginning of the season, they looked a little sketchy, but you've really seen them come along as an offense. Probably right around like the Dallas game, where they took like a tough OT loss, and then they had the Jets the next week, which definitely righted the ship. But ever since then, you've seen Bourne obviously does more with the touchdown angle than Myers does, and again, Aguilar tends to be more of a real deep threat, if at all anything, when he catches the ball. But Kendrick Bourne's probably been, like you said, the most consistent guy for him all season, and nobody associated the passing game with that team as well. So he's definitely a guy worthy of a roster spot, and definitely could slide into flex potential. Got a Jacksonville matchup down the road there in week 17, which is looking pretty good. Revenge game, Buffalo, Miami at the end of the season. So a lot of these could shake out, where he's definitely going to get you double digits in that, maybe like 15, maybe plus points, if he gets a lot of receptions, if you're in PPR, and maybe that touchdown to get you over the hump. I did have one name to add. I know you had a few guys out there, and actually looking at percentages of ownerships, he's a shade under 50 in most of them. I think Russell Gage is probably worthy of a little bit. A lot of people probably have him by now, just because he's definitely going to be a guy that's probably rostered based on the concept of him now really being a wide receiver 1. And that is justified probably in the last 4 weeks, where he's averaging over 15 points a game the last 4 weeks. He's wide receiver 20. That is definitely wide receiver 2, if not possibly a 1, depending on your lineup or the matchup. And 14th overall in targets in the last 4 weeks. And it looks like NFL.com in our league, it's about 47%. It's about 45 in ESPN and under 40 in Yahoo. So I know that can be a factor for some leagues where you do have a guy like that out there, and nobody's really paying attention to Atlanta's offense because they're not a good team. Again, if he's floating out there, or somebody released him for waiver purposes, and he's floating around out there, he's absolutely startable. I mean, again, it's no secret. I know, Pat, you talked about him a couple times so far this season, but he's definitely seemed like he's come into his own. And for whatever Matt Ryan has left in the tank, it's not Kyle Pitts, and we know that Calvin Ridley's not there, and he's finally healthy. So it does look like Russell Gage is definitely a name to have on your roster, and probably should already be in your starting lineup, depending on your situation.
Yeah, Gage is also one of those guys that I do believe should be added. I think, again, he's one of those guys where I feel like he's very up and down, and he's going to be pretty tough to start. But a lot of guys on this list fall under that same sort of umbrella of, is it a good week to start this guy? What is the matchup or whatever? So, yeah, I think Gage is definitely a higher end matchup based play, where if the Falcons are like, I wouldn't have played him this week. He had a decent week. I think he went 4 for 64 or something this week. I probably wouldn't have played him this week because Carolina's defense has been pretty good. But I think that moving forward, like you said, with a couple of good matchups, yeah, he's absolutely a guy that you could throw into your flex spot. And, he's going to get his share of the targets, being the number one, option in that offense. So yeah, he's definitely a guy who makes sense to pick up. I think, did he lead the team in targets? Yeah, he led him, Pitts, and Mike Davis all had 6 targets this week. So, and yeah, he was 4 for 64. So, he's a guy who is going to put up respectable numbers. And if he scores a touchdown, like you said, he could be in that 15 to 18 point range if he scores. The last guy I'm going to mention is just going to be quick because we've mentioned him pretty much every waiver episode every week since probably
you finally released him too, man. What's up? You all right?
No, I never had. I don't think I ever had him in our league. Oh no, I had to drop him. I did have to drop him to pick up a running back. Yeah, just in time.
Feeling well.
No, just in time because I think he goosed that week, and I thought I could get him back for this week, which I believe he's still available in our league. But the guy we're talking about is Rashad Bateman for the Baltimore Ravens. He's available in roughly 77% of leagues. Had his best game as a pro, his first 100-yard game this week versus the Browns. Had 8 targets, 7 catches for 103 yards. And he really stepped up with a couple of really big catches towards the end of the game. And even with Lamar Jackson out with that injury, with the ankle injury, he gave him a shot to come back and win that game. The Browns were up pretty big for most of that game. And the Ravens came back and made it a game. And Bateman almost helped to turn it around for them and get him a W. But if you've rostered him at any point in this year, it's been kind of disappointing. We've talked about him numerous times as, sort of being this training camp superstar. And then, obviously didn't get to play in the beginning of the year because of injury. So I think he just needs to get targets, get himself more comfortable in the offense. And I feel like he's earned that, with the play moving forward. I feel like with Sammy Watkins healthy and in the game, there's going to be a competition at that number 2 wide receiver position. Obviously, Hollywood Brown's the number 1. Sammy Watkins has had his opportunity in the NFL for many, many years. And he's had really big games. And he even had one season that was a fairly respectable season. But he's had numerous opportunities, and he's never turned into the guy that I think he was drafted to be. He was a first round draft pick, very highly sought after in the draft, and he just never became, that true alpha number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, I think he's like a Mike Williams, like same kind of guy.
Yes. Yeah. All the physical talent in the world, but for whatever reason, just can't seem to put everything together on the field. And I think that Bateman is going to be given the opportunity to show whether or not he's that guy before they're willing to give Sammy Watkins another opportunity to prove that he isn't that guy. Moving forward, I do see Bateman sort of getting more targets, more snaps, being more involved in the offense. And then if he fails to produce, maybe they turn back to Watkins, but he is a guy that I think could continue to see 7+ targets for the rest of the season, especially in an offense like the Ravens, who being the fact that they are one of the best rushing teams in the NFL, they also throw the ball a lot. And, Lamar Jackson is top 8 as far as pass attempts per game. So I think a lot of the rushing comes from when Jackson drops back to pass and doesn't see something he likes, and then, decides at that point that he's going to take off and run. And that's where, a lot of the rushing yards come from. But I do like Bateman moving forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah. And if Huntley starts a couple games, if that ankle sprain is bad, he obviously looked to him pretty strong, like you said. And Baltimore, just looking at it, they're top 12, 13 in pass attempts. So yeah, they, like you said, they do. Well, they're a ground team. We know that, but their offense does throw the football. So whether it's Lamar, whether it's Tyler Huntley, trying to get them in games. And obviously if Bateman has a game like he had the other day where, he 7 of 8 for 103, that's somebody you can kind of bet on, so to speak. And Cleveland has a decent defense. He's got a couple tough matchups maybe coming down the road, but if they want to establish him and really give him a chance to shine, and he's starting to warm up a little bit coming off of injuries and different things like that, then yeah, I think he's definitely a guy that could probably be a solid flex for you if he keeps up the 7+ targets a game. Absolutely.
All right, so I think that's it for our wide receiver waivers. We do have some streamers available for you for your quarterbacks, your tight ends, your defense, special teams. And, we kind of do these each week just kind of based off of matchups. We know that, again, going into the fantasy playoffs, more than likely you have your roster set. But I have to say from experience, there's been many years where I have basically just foregone my quarterback in the draft and streamed quarterbacks for the entire season. So I think that, obviously there are still fantasy owners out there that do that. I believe that streaming defenses is the only way to play fantasy football. If you listen to, one of our very first episodes, our draft strategies episode, I am very big on never drafting a defense or kicker until the last 2 rounds of the draft. I don't believe that you can predict defense because it really does depend so much on matchups and, play styles and things like that. So, we're going to give you some streaming options for your playoff run that, and we'll do this for you each week, give you some options where if you happen to be streaming a defense or a quarterback or perhaps even a tight end, you'll have some options available to you and we'll be able to kind of talk you through some of the better matchups for the week. We'll start with quarterbacks. One of the better options, I think, this week streaming is Justin Fields versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are the 4th worst team to the quarterback position and absolute dead last to the quarterback position the last 6 weeks. They just gave up almost 32 points to Ben Roethlisberger on Thursday night. And Rudy, you used that knowledge to crush me in fantasy this week. So congratulations. But Minnesota is one of those teams where you can just play your quarterback against them. They, for whatever reason, do not know how to close out games. They constantly are letting teams. It's funny because when you play a quarterback against Minnesota, you watch the game and you're like watching the first half and you're like, oh boy, I made a big mistake. But you just know in the back of your head that the tables are going to turn, and that same Minnesota team that played in the first half is going to stay in the locker room, and a bunch of different guys are going to come out with the same jersey numbers on. And that's the only thing I can think happens. Like they must go in there and just take off their uniform and just like give it to these other guys and like, we're done for the day. But Fields had a pretty respectable day against the Packers last night. And I do think while Fields is not by any means a guy who's going to throw for 300 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, he does give you that element of rushing that you love to get out of your quarterback. Sunday night game, he rushed 9 times for 74 yards. So if you think about, if you're in a 4-point passing touchdown league, we play in a 6. But if you're in a 4-point passing touchdown league, 74 yards rushing is basically worth almost 2 extra passing touchdowns. So if you have these guys, this is why, last week we talked about Taysom Hill and, even potentially Cam Newton. We understand that these guys are not Joe Montana. They're not Tom Brady. Like, we get it. But fantasy points, you don't have to be, the most accurate or the best passer or be able to read defenses or any of that stuff to be a viable fantasy quarterback. You just need to be able to put fantasy points on the board, and you can do that actually easier with your legs than you can with your arm in most scoring systems. So I do like rushing quarterbacks, and I do love the matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings for Fields. Another guy that you could play in a pinch this week is Ben Roethlisberger. Again, this week he gets the Tennessee Titans.
It's starting to become a trend. He's not bad. Huh?
Yeah, all of a sudden, right? Like, it is what it is. I think, the Steelers defense sort of kept them in games early in the season, and now they seem to not really be what they were earlier, whether that's injury, whether it's, teams just, sort of figuring out blocking schemes to keep their pass rushers at bay or whatever it is, Roethlisberger is starting to have to throw more in order to keep the Steelers in these games. And I think there's at least a chance in this game that he has to do that against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are the 5th worst team to the quarterback position overall. They've actually been a little bit better the last 6 games, but some of that has been due to match up the 16th worst team in the last 6 weeks. But Roethlisberger just put up 2 good weeks in a row. Rudy, you called his he was your start of the week 2 weeks in a row and has finished in the top 10 2 weeks in a row. Actually, will probably finish in the top 4 or 5 this week. So he does have that ability in him. And I think that the Tennessee Titans pass defense has been porous enough to where another top 10 finish is completely within reason for Roethlisberger this week. I also like Jimmy Garoppolo against Atlanta. Atlanta's the 2nd worst team to the quarterback position and 6th worst over the last 6 weeks. Jimmy Garoppolo, again, is not one of these guys who generally goes out and lights up the scoreboard. But I do think that he's got a ton of talent on that team. Brandon Ayuk is starting to get more involved. They've got Deebo Samuel, playing all over the place in that offense. Kittle is finally back and healthy and has just been, the last 2 weeks, I think George Kittle has well over 300 yards receiving. So I think Jimmy G is, good enough to get the ball to those guys. He doesn't turn it over a ton, so you don't have to really worry too much about, giving back points to turnovers. And against Atlanta, who just bleeds points, I think that, this could be one of those games where a screen pass to Deebo or, there's a ton of other options where, it's not just a standard pass that you see getting a touchdown, which Garoppolo is completely capable of, but the 49ers offense sort of mixes things up so well that I think you could see one of these bubble screens or, even a screen to the running back, those technically count as, passing yards and touchdowns. So I think there's a very good possibility that the 49ers put up a pretty big number on the Falcons. And I think that Jimmy Garoppolo could be the benefactor of a pretty high scoring 49ers offense. This could also be a game where the 49ers have 4 rushing touchdowns, but that's possible any week. But I do think against a team like Atlanta, you can think about streaming Jimmy G and, him not killing you if you don't have another option at quarterback. And the last guy I'm going to recommend with a little hesitation is going to be Ryan Tannehill versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is the 16th worst team versus the quarterback, so mid-pack. But over the last 6, they've been the 11th worst team. And, like I just said, when we're talking about Ben Roethlisberger, they have been giving up a lot more points recently. They haven't been able to stop anybody. Kirk Cousins had a monster game against them this week. Dalvin Cook had a monster game against them this week, and their rushing defense was the tops in the league in the beginning of the season. So I think if this game goes into a shootout, I think both of these quarterbacks obviously are playable in your fantasy lineup. Tannehill got Julio Jones back this week and seemed to make it out of the game without, re-aggravating anything in his old body. But I think Tannehill has an opportunity him and Big Ben have the opportunity to kind of to go back and forth in this game and, kind of match each other for points going against, each other's defenses that have just sort of not been great the last few weeks. And I think this game has one of those, I use the term sneaky shootout, but it's I think it's got a potential to be one of those sneaky shootout type of games. So I do think that I would prefer Ben in this game because I feel like the Titans are a little bit more apt to potentially rushing touchdowns. But I also do like the fact that Ryan Tannehill is a little bit more mobile, had a rushing touchdown this past week, has a few rushing touchdowns on the year, and does have the ability to sort of, kind of bootleg and get out and run for a touchdown. So I think you could go with either of these guys. I think my order would probably be Fields, Garoppolo, Roethlisberger, Tannehill. But I do think that any of those guys is a viable play, and just really depends on how you think these games are going to go on who you should pick. Rude, you want to jump into the tight ends? I know how much you love.
Always do. First off, I know we did have a little bit of a list of some names again based on different matchups and stuff like that. One of the first people though overall I think really has to be mentioned based on his just the volume, performance, and everything over the last few weeks is Gerald Everett from Seattle. He had another decent game yesterday against the Texans. 2 targets, but 15 yards and a touchdown. This is his, let's see, it's been kind of up and down. He went 14, then 6, then 14, then had a rough one, and then 10 points. So he's definitely an option. He is, in the last 4 weeks, he's pretty much been like the second most targeted tight end. Again, there's some stats still got to clean up, but he's really been in the mix a lot, and I think it's helped Russell Wilson kind of get his hand and the offense back in hand, so to speak. Again, obviously Houston helps as well to play against them, but it looks like he's starting to become a little bit of a piece of that offense. Again, he's not a Kittle, to say the least. So yeah, Gerald Everett's not there, but again, he's definitely a viable name that some remember him from his Rams days. And again, he always had a little bit of a knack to be involved here and there. So he's a guy who gets some red zone targets. Again, the touchdown dependency is there, but he's a guy that will be going into a matchup. Ironically, you got to be kidding me. Are they going up against the Rams this week? Yeah. So it's a revenge game as well. So Gerald Everett's probably going to go off for 22 points. I'm just speculating a little bit there, joking around. But yeah, the Rams do. They're average against the tight end position. They give up, roughly about 7-8 points a game. So you could see him be a safe floor kind of guy in a tough division matchup against the Rams. Next up is kind of another little interesting, I guess you could say interesting spot to be in tight end wise. Logan Thomas is been banged up and he's on IR. He's out. So Washington has been trying to fill the gaps. Well, we saw Ricky Seals-Jones, former Cardinal there, kind of being the guy, based on the fact that Thomas was out, and it is what it is there. And he had a couple reasonable games. There's been a name recently that is starting to come into play a little bit just based on that offense. And with the matchup coming this week is somebody who could be one of the deepest sleepers of the season. John Bates is also getting a little bit involved now that Logan Thomas is out. And again, Seals-Jones is there, but he was banged up a little bit as well. So you're starting to see John Bates get a little bit involved. If you look at season long, again, this is the Washington football team, but Seals-Jones has 39 targets on the season versus Bates, who has 15. And you say, okay, well, the disparity's there. But the last 4 weeks has been roughly only about 4 targets for Seals-Jones. And again, Bates getting 11 targets. So I think that they have a matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And for us, Pat and I both know very well. And for those in fantasy, you should also know by now that the Philadelphia Eagles cannot do anything to stop the tight end position. It has been in their nature for the past few seasons, and it has gotten to be just pretty much an auto start based on the matchups this season against the Eagles. Again, Bates may be getting a little bit more involved. He was 3 or 4 for 42 yards against the Raiders the other week. And then he did get a little bit involved against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, whether or not that's going to transfer over or whether or not Seals-Jones maybe feels a little bit healthier and they're going to get him back involved, it's a little bit tricky to say the least. But I really feel like either one of these guys, depending on the matchup, is really going to be a guy you have to go with. Now, again, Seals-Jones, he has been the name. Bates, be honest, I never heard of him. I don't really follow Washington that much, but knowing that he was as involved as he was, and again, knowing that he's going to be there against the Philadelphia Eagles, I don't know. I kind of think Bates a little bit more than Seals-Jones, but again, I think it's also based on the health factors of both players, and again, the matchup dictates that you got to put one of them in. Obviously, Logan Thomas would have been the better of all the matchups, but again, right now, I think based on Seals Jones not being healthy, that you really are starting to look in the direction of John Bates as a start against the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, you might find a better option, but you're playing the Eagles. I think you have a pretty good shot. Next up, we're talking about Tyler Higbee. Again, he was just placed on the COVID list just roughly an hour or so before we kind of got rolling here. And obviously, hopefully that's going to hold him back on Monday Night Football against the Arizona Cardinals. But hopefully everything's okay and it doesn't transfer over to next week because, again, we did just mention that they have a matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. And Seattle is the fifth worst team against the tight end position. The Philadelphia Eagles, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Seattle Seahawks. They're the bottom five against the tight end position. They're all giving up 10 plus points a game against the position. And again, bonuses aside, obviously PPR gets involved a lot there. But again, they're giving up points. Seattle gives up points to the tight end position. It's going to be a tough matchup. Absolutely. We know Higbee gets involved when he's there and when he's healthy. He's always been that kind of guy where you get him the football, he has no problem getting himself involved. Earlier this season, he did have 14 yards and a touchdown. He had about 10 points in our league. And again, PPR has gotten involved a little bit there, but he won't be playing this week. So we're hoping he does get back in next week against the Seattle Seahawks. Another guy who's been, speaking of COVID, who got kind of thrust a little bit more into the forefront and has been a little bit of I don't know, I guess to say an up and down kind of guy, so to speak. But Austin Hooper, he signed with Cleveland and they already had a decent amount of tight ends in their area. You already had David Njoku and Harrison Bryant was starting to become a little bit of a thing. So now you have a three-headed monster at tight end, I guess you say, so to speak. But Austin Hooper coming off a pretty solid game yesterday, and we all kind of felt like it was going to happen against Baltimore based on the matchup. He did not disappoint. He put up about 14 points in our league. He was 5 catches on 7 targets, 30 yards and a touchdown. If Njoku continues on COVID and Harrison Bryant still sidelined with the ankle, that's something that's going to probably push to the forefront Hooper even more. They're playing the Raiders. Just mentioned the Raiders are the second worst. They're in that bottom 5 against the tight end position. For streaming, that's really what you want to do. You want to go against poor defenses. And the Raiders are one of them. So look to get Austin Hooper in your lineup if you're a tight end streamer. Another guy here, it's a little bit tough, but this guy's a bit of a stretch. I think Hunter Henry is another name. We had him a few times this season as one of our better tight ends. He is coming off a bye week, and he is going up against the Indianapolis Colts, who are just outside the bottom 5. They are giving up still close to about 10 points a game to the tight end position. We've seen Hunter Henry get a lot of usage. Jonnu Smith, not as much, but Hunter Henry had been a little bit of I guess you could say a safety valve, but it seems like Mac Jones spreads the football around. He's not scared to find, open receivers and tight ends alike. Last couple of weeks, Henry had a little bit of a neck injury that probably slowed him down a little bit and obviously was not targeted. Virtually nobody was on that Monday night game against Buffalo. So coming off a bye going against Indy, and it's a Saturday matchup. So yes, also this week, don't forget that you do have Saturday football. So we now have Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Saturday, and following Sunday. So you're starting to see those games come back through. Double check your lineups and everything else. So Hunter Henry, Saturday evening against the Indianapolis Colts, looking like a pretty good matchup there. And again, maybe even Jonnu Smith in a pinch if he's available. But looks like the Colts give up some points to the tight end position, and that's probably where you want to get involved. And finally, we're going to talk about Tyler Conklin. He has been getting the volume. Now, he didn't really turn it out too much this past week. Again, it was a weird game. I mean, obviously, Dalvin Cook was the offense the entire game. And when a player gets that hot, you're not really going to see them deviate from that course. Going up against the Chicago Bears, there's a team who's a little tough against the tight end position. Give up about 6 points a game, which maybe if you're just looking for a safer floor with Conklin, and there's not a lot of options left out there, he might be a guy. He's had some decent blips on the radar. I mean, to say the least. Obviously, this will be the first matchup for Minnesota against Chicago. Minnesota coming off a tough loss. It's a Monday night football game, so you never know how things are going to happen when it comes to getting involved. I think people maybe thought that Thielen being out against Pittsburgh may have increased his value, but again, Cook took that game over and was not letting it go. Coming back into Monday night against the Bears, you could see Conklin getting the volume that he had been getting with targets, and especially, especially in the red zone. I mean, the last 4 weeks going into this week, he had 9 red zone targets. That was tops in the NFL for the tight end position, and about 20 plus targets overall coming now. So Tyler Conklin will finish out. We're looking at the John Bates, Ricky Seals-Jones concept against the Eagles, Tyler Higbee versus those Seattle Seahawks, Austin Hooper going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, Hunter Henry against the Indianapolis Colts, and Tyler Conklin against the Chicago Bears. Now we're going to take a look at some defense special teams that are probably some of your better options that are out there on a stream. And some of these are really going to kind of be, again, it's matchup based. I think one of the ones that you really want to, I guess to say look at is, and don't laugh, but the Houston Texans, they are going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Jacksonville's a mess, and I'm not the first person to tell you that. But again, looking at how poor they are, they just, again, it's a bad offense. The coach, there's talk of maybe him already being one and done, and it looks like maybe he wants to run to Notre Dame because that job's open. Fighting with his assistants, clashing already with the starting quarterback, virtually benching the running back who's an all-pro running back. These are things that kind of lead you to think like, what the hell's going on in Jacksonville? Well, Houston, again, they're not world beaters on defense. They've had a couple though out there, double-digit performances. This could be one of them. Going up against Jacksonville earlier in the season, they opened the season, they put up 7 points against that offense, and Jacksonville doesn't look any better than they did then. So I think you might want to expect a reasonable output of anywhere in that, maybe like 7 to possibly a double-digit defensive performance again against Jacksonville. Next up, we are going to look for the San Francisco 49ers. They have a nice matchup this week, and they're going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who, again, it's another team that just bleeds points. Jacksonville gives up the most. Atlanta gives up the second most to the defense. And San Francisco is starting to rally and really look like a solid team and look like they are, again, right now they are the second wild card. They're not trying to let anything go because although they're 6 out of 7 playoff teams, they are only one game ahead of a slew of other teams before tiebreakers. So they can't let go right now. They have to keep pushing. Obviously, they're only about, after tonight, we'll see with the Rams. If the Rams were to lose and Arizona win, or it flips over, they can smell some blood in the water there too. San Francisco has a solid matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And again, Atlanta, as far as even scoring on offense, they're one of the worst teams when it comes to putting up points, doing virtually anything. So again, San Francisco definitely going to take advantage of that matchup and just look to steamroll over the Atlanta Falcons. The Miami Dolphins are next up. They're going up against the New York Football Jets. And we all know that the Jets are another team. They're about the 5th or 6th worst against giving up points to a defense. And Miami coming off a bye, they've had time to plan for this matchup. They've been a pretty solid all season as far as, I think they had one really tough game, but it was against Tampa. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, you had a 23-point output against the Carolina Panthers. They just had the Giants right before the bye, and then they come out and they go right up against the Jets. It's probably going to be one of those games where, again, they keep the score low enough to keep that points allowed total, maybe get a sack or a pick off of Zach Wilson or 2, kind of like the Miami Dolphins this week against the Jets. And finally, the Cleveland Browns are going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, again, defense, they give up points to the defense. It's really, It's a tough team. I mean, it's a shame they've been through a lot this season, both on and off the field, and it really seemed to take away a lot of that early momentum where they looked like a pretty solid team overall. Penalties kill them, and that's one of the big things, but that's always been with the Raiders probably since their inception. Again, they have a pretty solid passing offense, and the running game is involved, but they do turn the ball over a little bit, and lately they really have just not been. They just haven't been really a killer team, so to speak. Again, that offense has started to get sapped, and it has been anemic ever since losing a lot against the Cleveland Browns, who are pushing to stay in the playoff race. Right now, they are just on the outside looking in, but a lot of that is based on head-to-head record. 2 wins for the Browns. Suddenly, they're really looking to kind of settle in, and they're right behind the Baltimore Ravens. So they have nothing to lay down for. They're going to get up against the Raiders this week. So Houston, San Francisco, the Miami Dolphins, and the Cleveland Browns are 4 of the defenses that if you're looking to stream in a pinch and you're looking for just the solid matchup on the other side of the ball, I think those teams will help you out, and they should be available in most of your leagues.
Yeah, and we do the streaming defenses, again, based off of teams that we assume are going to be available in your league. One of those 4 should be available. I don't see, especially teams like Houston, Miami, we're on a bye. I don't see those teams being rostered. So the reason that we go with some of these teams instead of, maybe the more obvious answer like Bills versus the Panthers or the Cardinals versus the Lions is because those teams are probably taken. Now, obviously, if you can get your hands on, a team like the Cardinals or, the Bills or, the Cowboys, any of these teams where they're a smash play, obviously you pick those defenses up and play them. But those defenses are generally not just hanging out there on the waiver wire because they are the better defenses in your league. These are some options for you. Like we said, just based off of matchups, the Jets and the Jags lead the entire NFL in turnovers. So, again, that we preach playing teams that have possibility to get some sacks, get some turnovers. This is really where your defense scores. Not giving up points is great. It helps the bottom line. It helps get you those points against. But all of these teams are professionals. You don't see that many, shutouts and 3-point type performances. And if you do, those are usually by your New Englands and, your teams that are already, your defenses that are already sort of rostered by other people. So those kind of stalwarts are generally not available. But, like I said, these are some streaming options if nothing else is available, if none of those top defenses are available in your league or you don't have one already. My sort of, again, just giving you some insight as to, what I like to do heading into the playoffs is I will generally only keep one defense on my roster during the regular season. But heading into the playoffs, I usually will pick up a second defense, sometimes even a third, depending on how stacked my roster is at other positions and whether I need those roster spots for, maybe some wide receivers or running backs or what have you. But if I have a pretty tight roster, I'll pick up 2 or 3 defenses and play matchups on those defenses weeks in advance so that I don't have to worry about skimming that waiver wire, using my waiver priority, or waiting until, the scraps after your waivers clear to pick up a defense. So, start looking ahead at some defenses that you could pick up for the following weeks, the teams that you really want to target: the New York Jets, Jaguars. The Panthers have been really bad and turned the ball over a lot this year. The Bears haven't scored a ton of points, nor have they, they also turn the ball over quite a bit with the rookie quarterback. So, if you can target any of those teams, Washington's been really bad recently, Atlanta. So any of these teams where, you can get some turnovers, you can get some sacks, you can keep the score relatively low, start looking to pick up those defenses, a week or sometimes even 2 weeks in advance and take a look and see if the defense that you're picking up, maybe they have 2 good matchups in a row, and then you don't have to worry about rostering, a second or third defense or whatever. So, we're going to give you the options week to week, and maybe next week, what I'll do is I'll take a look at the entire playoffs and see if we can give you some options for, maybe a defense that you could ride for 2 or 3 weeks consecutively, and see if there's anyone out there who might fit that bill at the defensive position.
All right, folks, that's going to do it this week for our streamers and waiver wire pickups. We hope some of this helps to get you that push into the fantasy playoffs. Most of you may have already a pretty solid lineup, but as we said, you got to be ready for those landmines of injuries, backups and handcuffs, and again, just some better matchups that might be that deciding factor to push it over the top.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. Good luck this week, and we'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.